Hi and welcome to my floss tube video. I'm Jean Farish and I am so glad that you're here with me today. I apologize that I wasn't around the last couple of weeks. I kind of decided at the last minute that I was going to take that time just for me and my family and just all the things that are just wrapped up literally and figuratively in getting ready for and enjoying the Christmas holidays. I am making this tape on New Year's Eve, and as a typical New Year's Eve thing, I'm thinking about both the past and the future. You, of course, are probably watching this on New Year's Day, and I hope that wherever you are, that you are celebrating wisely and safely in the new year. So let's get started with, once again, I'm reminding myself to remind you to subscribe. And if you want to get notifications, there's a little bell icon that you also have to click on. So, okay, got that out of the way. I have a big trip planned for the whole month of February. And at this point, fingers crossed that everything is going to go off as planned. But what I want to particularly mention to you is that on February 7th, 8th, and 9th, I'm going to be at a wonderful new shop called Fire Poppies. When I say new, relatively new. Remember, I've been in this industry for now 40 plus years. So Fire Poppies is in Somerville, South Carolina, kind of in the area of Charleston, South Carolina. And I am going to be teaching a couple of classes there and just kind of hanging out in the shop. So I hope that even if you're not there to take a class, that you'll come by and introduce yourself and say, hey. For those of you who are not familiar with Fire Poppies, it is both a counted cross stitch and needlepoint store. And this is the counted thread class I'll be teaching called Kathryn's Garden. And those of you who may have participated in the Spirit of Cross Stitch festivals in the 90s may say, oh, that piece looks familiar. This was the very first Sunday sampler project that we did. So you've got your traditional cross stitch and a little bit of backstitch, and then the class will focus on the whitework, the eyelet and the four-sided stitch, etc. in this particular piece. And this is an all-day class. Now, in the area of needlepoint, I'm teaching this piece. And I'm going to show you two different colorways and a slight variation in the way the stitches are placed, but essentially it's the same class. This is called Square Within a Square, and I love teaching this piece because it gives us a chance to really play with color. We start with the stitches in the middle, and then we just work out from there. And I love teaching this at a shop that is as well stocked as Fire Poppies is, because this way, when inspiration strikes, you can just get up and pick out the next skein, the next color that you want to do. Now, this class actually spans 2 days, and it's not 2 full days of stitching, but I like to break it up so that students have a chance to kind of make some progress before they start the next section. So this is called Square Within a Square, and then we've got Kathryn's Garden, and both of those, of course, are going to be at Fire Poppies in Somerville, South Carolina. Now, kind of bracketing that my month away, I'm starting out with a retreat that I'm attending just another stitcher in South Carolina, the northern part of South Carolina, and then going down to Fire Poppies, and then I'm treating myself to a cruise with some stitching friends on the edge. I'm really, really excited about that. And again, fingers crossed that it's all going to go off as planned. Then I'm going over to the west coast of Florida and teaching at an EGA and attending another retreat as a stitcher. Again, not teaching at either one of those two retreats. So I hope that if you happen to be in any one of those places, that you'll stop by and say, hey, and I know you're from Floss Tube, whatever, and so we can chat a little bit. Okay, so that's the big thing to tell you. Oh, I will put the details about the classes including the cost in the episode description. And I'll give you the phone number and email address for you to contact the shop. Please don't contact me. The shop is taking care of the registrations for that class, for both of those classes. Okay, so, as the saying goes, God willing and the creek don't rise, all that stuff is going to happen as planned. It's just been, we thought 2020 was crazy, and then we thought 2021 was crazy. And this weekend, the wildfires in Colorado are on my mind. Many of you know that my older daughter lives in the Denver area. Right now, she's not being affected, but many, many of their very good friends, and certainly people that I know as well, and maybe people that you know, are just devastated by this wildfire that's just being fueled by these 100-mile-an-hour winds. And, it's just, what can you do except just get out of the way? So anyway, but I spend New Year's Eve looking backwards as well as forwards. And so one of the things I kind of wanted to look at in terms of stitching is, what did I accomplish in 2021? And I guess the very first two projects I think of were both big in terms of the way they were received, and also they were really big projects in terms of size. And that was Roxy, which is the reimagined sampler that I did that's based on the original Roxana Corson sampler. And that was a stitch along with video tutorials, and it was also a mystery stitch along, as far as that I revealed part of it each month over the course of 6 months. And that was, I really enjoyed it, and I got pretty good feedback. So I think that that's something that I want to do again in 2022. Obviously a different project. So look for that. Right now I don't have any concrete plans. Roxy's going to be a tough act to follow. And I guess I would also ask the question, would there be any interest in just doing Roxy again as a stitch along for the people who did not get a chance to participate the first time around? So that's a question that you can answer in comments if you want to, or send me an email if you're so inclined. So Roxy, and then of course Jane Hattersley. And Jane Hattersley is a sampler that I bought a couple of years ago, an authentic antique, and I bought it when they were doing a fundraiser for Salem Academy in college. And Jane's just a lovely sampler, and I think one that's just going to be enjoyed by many, many people for years to come. And then of course Merry Christmas in the Round, which I was hoping that by now I would have enough to show you that I was done, but I don't. It's still a work in progress. And I mentioned at the outset that I kind of took 2 weeks for myself and my family, and I really didn't even stitch as much as I would have thought I would have. So I've got Merry Christmas, which is another one of the round Christmas samplers, and Bison and the Elk, which I did for the Great Parks trip. And after the trip was completed, then I also put this one in my Etsy store as well. So that was a lot of fun to design. So that's the Bison and Elk, and I'm really proud of that one. And in that same vein, I also got a lot of work done on a new sampler for that series, which I'll talk about in just a second, because I'm going to put that in my 2022 kind of category. And I don't want to forget to mention Gracious Words. This is a sampler that allowed me to play around with some of the concepts of stump work, which is a 3-dimensional form of embroidery. And I loved the quote, and it allowed me to play with a color scheme that I enjoy so much, and to figure out kind of problem solving as far as how to make these tiny little beads and how to make the bee skep look three-dimensional, which then meant that I had to make the bench three-dimensional, and it was just a nice combination of creativity and, as I said, problem solving. And what else did I accomplish? Oh, the big accomplishment, I think, is this experience I'm having with you. I started this channel in 2020, but I really feel like that this past year I really came into my own, and we just topped 10,000 subscribers, which just thrills me so much, and it validates that what I think I can contribute to the world of needlework is something that you are interested in hearing and seeing. So, you know, I count you as part of that. I'm falling all over myself with words here. I count you as part of that success and accomplishing that growth. I certainly didn't have a goal in mind to hit 10,000 subscribers. I was thrilled when I had 200. But you know, growth is wonderful, and I, you know, we're in this together. So 2022, boy, don't we all wish we had a crystal ball in terms of what's going on in the world, and especially travel and whatnot. And I am just hoping that all of my travel plans are things that actually happen, besides things that I'm just doing personally and with my family. And we have the Hawaii cruise, a stitching cruise that's coming up. That one right now, last time I checked, I think it was about half full. So if you're interested in going, you might want to really look into that, into the details. And the classes are going to be fantastic. That's the first cruise I've participated in that's going to have 5 consecutive sea days. So as we travel from Vancouver, British Columbia to the Hawaiian Islands, we have a lot of the Pacific Ocean to cover. And those will be our 5 sea days. And Tony Gerardis, Terry Bay, and Kathy Reese are joining me. And the 4 of us together are teaching needlepoint and counted cross stitch or counted thread classes. And I will put links to all that information again in the episode description. So what else do I have on the horizon for 2022? As I said before, I'd like to do another stitch along, kind of in the same vein as Roxy. I will certainly repeat Roxy if there's enough interest. And I want to do another sampler reproduction. When I bought Jane Hattersley, I also bought a second sampler at the same time. And I have shown this one to you before, just little teasers. But I think it's time to really get this one out and get her charted and published. So that's on my list. I'm going to be finishing Bighorn and the Eagle, which I started for a proposed trip that had to be canceled. So I'm going to get that one done. Been working on America Land That We Love. Actually, this will be the 3rd time I'm stitching it, but this one is a stitch along that we started September 11th, and we expect to finish September 11th, 2022. So that isn't a design project, but that's just the time for stitching it and doing the Zoom greeting, the Zoom get-togethers. What else? Oh, I'm going to do more Zoom classes. Should have been doing them all along as we've been in various stages of lockdown, but I just never got around to it. So I'm going to be teaching Hair in the Basket in January, and that set of classes is full, but I'm going to repeat it in March. And so if you are interested in being a part of that, and again, that will be a Zoom class. And this one is using some of my vintage supply of DMC's flower thread, which is kind of it's a fun thread to stitch with. And I really feel like that this is a good project for anyone who has never stitched on linen, but they're interested in stitching on linen. So I'm not requiring you to have any experience stitching on linen for this class. But you do have to have a very keen willingness to learn, and an ability to read diagrams, and just, if you're motivated to learn how to stitch on linen, this is just a good project to get going with. And the way to find out the details for that would be to send me an email. I tend to not respond to those requests when they're left as comments. So please send me an email. That way I've got your email address. And I know I can hear some people saying, but I'll put my email address in my comment. Well, there's just too much that can go wrong with that. But if you send me an email, then I know I have a valid email address for you. That's really my reason for asking you to do it that way. Let's see, what else is on my list? I want to do some smalls. I need to balance these gigantic projects I'm doing and these medium-sized projects I'm doing with some things that can be done in a much shorter period of time. So that's kind of on my list. And I think that's going to keep me busy. I do have one more design project that I need to do, and that's to design the sampler for the British Isles cruise, which will be next summer of 2022. And it's pretty much worked out all the design elements, but I haven't started stitching it yet. So, and I probably won't show that to you until after the cruise. So that'll be a big project. A lot of what I design and stitch, I do in anticipation of classes that I'm going to be teaching or trips that I'm going to be taking that will include some sort of a commemorative or special event sort of project that will go with that. Okay, so in showing you my one project that's needlepoint that I'm going to be doing at Fire Poppies brings to mind a conversation that I want to have about the difference between counted cross stitch and needlepoint. About a week before Christmas, this really erupted into a big discussion on one of the Facebook groups. When, let me see, I'm going to say this as graciously as I can. A very popular and well-established blogger wrote a blog, I started to say intimating, pretty much saying that counted cross stitch I had to pause there for a second to really kind of get my words together. Pretty much said that counted cross stitch is inferior to needlepoint. I mean, that's the attitude and the statements that came through. I read the original blog rather than solely relying on the retelling of it from someone else's viewpoint. So because I design and stitch and love both of them is one of the reasons that I want to address this. But also because there was an awful lot of misinformation that was floating around in the comments that were left on that particular discussion. And I've heard them in other places as well. I would say that the single biggest difference between the two is that needlepoint is done on canvas. And there are two primary types of canvas, but one of them is, in terms of the current trending, is vastly more popular than the other. So I'm just going to limit my comments to that, because both of these worlds, counted cross stitch and needlepoint, are huge. And I could spend hours and hours talking about each of them and doing a compare and contrast. So for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to limit it to what we call mono canvas, which looks very much like linen, except it's not as fine. And also it's 100% cotton, and it has a lot of what we call sizing in it that makes it stiff. I need to pause here, I think, and go get, oh, actually, you know, duh, I've got a piece right here. Okay, so let's take a look at these close up. I don't need to get up at all, do I? Okay, so this is, again, it's my square and a square piece. And you can see that it looks, you know, it's woven like linen. It's what a weaver would call plain weave. And I guess to really show the stiffness, it's better for me to show it this way. I mean, it has a definite, you know, yeah, you can fold this and crease it. You don't want to, but it's just a lot stiffer than linen. For the purposes of the rest of the discussion, I'm not going to talk about Aida, because I think that, again, that just adds another layer of complication. It's easy to see that linen and needlepoint canvas are very similar. So let's, for the sake of this conversation, I'd like to just kind of put those parameters on it. Now, here in the US, we usually use the term needlepoint. I got fooled by the fact that, say, in the UK, it's known as tapestry. And I kind of tell the story on myself, because when I was organizing a trip for stitchers in the London area, I planned a couple of days of classes at the Royal School of Needlework in Hampton Court Palace. Yes, the classes are actually in the palace, which is just amazing all by itself, but it's a world-renowned school for needlework. And because I knew people on the trip were counted cross-stitchers and needlepointers, I also wanted to offer needlepoint classes. And try as I might, everything I looked at online with all their class descriptions, I never found a needlepoint class. It's because I was looking for needlepoint. If I had searched for tapestry, I would have found some delightful classes. So in different parts of the world, it's called different things. Another term that's used is canvas work, because it's done on canvas. And that's this square within a square piece is actually a counted canvas project. The design is not first painted on the canvas. It's just stitched on a plain blank piece of canvas, just like you would sit down with a blank piece of linen and do a counted cross-stitch project. Now, that's the ground cloth. That's the big difference between the two. So linen is 100% linen made from the flax plant. Needlepoint canvas is 100% cotton made from cotton. Okay, now there's somebody in the audience right now saying, yeah, but how about even weaves? That's not linen. No, it's not, but it's woven in the same way. It's a plain weave, over one, under one, over one, under one. And so I'm just kind of lumping that together, again, just to keep a focus on this conversation. Okay, so how about the threads? This was one of the biggest misinformation statements that I saw in this particular discussion. There were people who felt that needlepoint was limited to wool, and that is just not true. I will say this, that in terms of thread choices, there are infinitely more choices for canvas work than there will ever be for linen, simply because of the sturdiness of the canvas. There are a lot of threads that just won't work on linen. They're too bulky. They don't bend easily enough. They just won't work. So if you are interested in exploring a variety of threads, I would really suggest that you look into counted canvas work. I think that you will be absolutely blown away with the possibilities. Kind of as an aside, and I didn't plan this in my original thoughts of this, but it kind of came up in the last day or so, that somebody was talking about one of the metallics and how it was just impossible to use. not all threads made by companies, even companies like DMC, are meant for counted cross stitch. They just aren't. So there are a lot of threads that counted cross stitchers struggle to use because they don't really, the struggle comes about because those threads aren't really meant for counted cross stitch. They're meant for some other type of embroidery. And yes, embroidery is this huge umbrella term, and under that umbrella term, you've got your needlepoint / canvas work / tapestry, and you've got your counted cross stitch and hardanger and a whole bunch of other types of embroidery. Okay, so that's your thread. Okay, how about cost? Counted cross stitchers are constantly in sticker shock when they first visit a needlepoint store, and they feel that it's outrageous. Now, because I have hand-painted needlepoint canvases, I will tell you that they are time-consuming. Each little intersection on the canvas has to be painted. So it's time-consuming. And you've got the person's creativity and other factors that all get kind of rolled in together to determine the cost of that canvas. Is it in everyone's price range? No. But please, please don't make disparaging remarks online about how somebody else chooses to spend their money when it brings them as much joy. I'm kind of making an assumption that if you're watching this, it's because you like to do hand embroidery of some type. And whatever it is that brings you joy, some other type of needlework might be bringing somebody else joy. And that's okay. The threads tend to be more expensive. The canvases can be more expensive. When you're doing a project like this, the canvas is blank, and so you don't have to pay for a hand-painted design. So please also don't write off all needlepoint thinking it's all expensive. There are beautiful work that is done on an unpainted canvas. So there is that as well. Can we find a way in 2022 to love our craft, hold it in high esteem, without denigrating what somebody else does? If I were to express a New Year's wish for the world of needlework, that would be it. Now, before I depart this conversation, though, I do want to say this. I guess the only defense I do have for that blogger, and it's mainly a matter of just not being aware. We counted cross stitchers have kind of done this to ourselves, because when we had this wonderful resurgence of interest in counted cross stitch in this country, in the US, I'm going to say in the 70s, the term counted cross stitch started being used. And it was an accurate label for the early work for people like Jenny Thompson, who most of us credit with having this whole interest in what we do. But counted cross stitch is one stitch. There are hundreds of stitches that I do with counted thread work. And had our industry used and embraced that phrase, counted thread work, rather than counted cross stitch, I think that would be one way to elevate what we do, so that people like this blogger don't think that all we do is simply little X's, because it's just not true. Now, if all you ever do are X's, that's fine too. But that's not all there is to do on a piece of linen. I hope that some of this makes sense. So I guess to sort of summarize, the big difference between the two is your ground cloth, the cost, the threads, and I'll also say the stitches. I think that there are a lot of stitches that are done in needlepoint that can also be done in counted thread. And there are some counted thread stitches that can't really be done on needlepoint, can't be done easily. You know, I really try to avoid saying it can't be done, because just as soon as I say that, somebody say, oh, well, I can figure it out. And I think that that's great. And I would never want to limit anyone's reach in terms of their creativity and what they're trying to accomplish. You know, I often use baking to illustrate a point. So here it is, and then I'm going to get off my soapbox. If you bake the world's best biscuits, and by biscuits, I'm talking about the fluffy, usually eaten at breakfast things that what we Americans call biscuits. For my UK friends, what you think of as biscuits, we think of as cookies, and it's not really a scone, so forget all that. Okay, so, but let's say you bake the world's best biscuits. They are fluffy, they are light, they are tasty, they are wonderful. And that's all you can bake. And let's say they're prize-winning biscuits. I mean, you win the prize at your state fair every year. Don't get all riled up when someone says you're at the entry level of baking. I mean, after all, haven't you watched the Great British Baking Show? I mean, look at the things these people create. So if all you do are cross stitches, I will never, ever, ever disparage that you do beautiful cross stitches. But I don't really think it's fair to get riled up when somebody says it's an entry-level stitch. So I don't know. I'm probably, you know, at the beginning I asked people to subscribe, and I hope that nobody leaves me because I have this opinion. But I just I don't know. I guess I might end up going back and editing most of this out. Because I don't want to step on any toes, I finally sat down and wrote down my thoughts. So bear with me while I read them. When I look at counted thread work compared to needlepoint, do I think that one is an entry level for the other? Not at all. But frankly, if I am just comparing counted cross stitch to needlepoint, then yeah, I can see the point that the blogger was making. But, and it's a big but, the blog writer was fooled by the misnomer that the early leaders of our industry used to describe a craft that can be incredibly intricate, complex, and demanding. I love FAQs like this one, and I appreciate the time people take to leave a comment or send me an email and let me know what's on your mind, especially if there's something that's confusing or you're wondering why we do a particular thing. You know me, I'm all about best practices, and I am trying, I guess if I were to make one resolution or one more personal goal for myself for 2022, it's to be more gracious and to try to see another person's viewpoint before I react, and to make sure that I don't sort of get into the whole having to put somebody else down in order to elevate myself, because that doesn't work. I mean, it's not healthy, and it just contributes to a whole toxic thing going on. So I think that's, and again, it was one of the things that bothered me about that whole controversy erupting on Facebook, was that it you know, nothing riles people more than somebody else putting down what you love. And I think that there are ways of sort of sharing what you love and making sure that somebody who doesn't really understand what it is that you're doing, there are ways of helping them understand that without putting them down. And that's going to be my continuing goal for 2022 and beyond, until it becomes just second nature, I guess. So I don't know. I have several friends that are just so gracious. I mean, everything they say and do is just gracious, gracious, gracious. And I just wish sometimes that I could be like them. And that's kind of my goal. Anyway, it's New Year's Eve. It's time to go upstairs and do a little bit of preparation. I think I'm going to spend the rest of the afternoon and evening and stitching. And at midnight, I hope I'm stitching as 2022 comes in. So wherever you are, I hope that you stitch happy and stay safe. And I'll see you next week.